In the heat of World War II, one forbidden act of kindness between enemies would change everything. Isaiah Carter, a black American medic, was taught that Japanese people were heartless monsters until he met Aiko Tanaka, the wounded nurse whose arm he saved against direct orders. What started as a simple act of mercy soon spiraled into a dangerous game of secrets and lies, where showing humanity to the enemy could cost Isaiah everything. As propaganda crumbled in the face of truth, both Isaiah and Aiko discovered their greatest battle wasn't against each other, but against a world determined to keep them apart. Their story spans continents and decades, proving that sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones we're forbidden to make. Subscribe now and share this story if you believe that human connection can transcend even the deepest divides of war. The morning sun beat down on the half-ruined field hospital. Inside, 12 Japanese women huddled together, their white nursing uniforms dirty and torn. Outside, the gunfire had finally stopped. After weeks of fighting, the last Japanese outpost in southern Luzon had fallen to the Americans. Aiko Tanaka, the head nurse, peered through a crack in the wall. Her mouth was dry from thirst, and her arm throbbed where shrapnel had cut her 3 days ago. The wound was turning an angry red at the edges. "They're coming," she whispered to the others in Japanese. "Remember what we were told. Show no emotion." The women had been taught since childhood what American soldiers would do to them. They'd been shown pictures, told stories. Everyone knew Americans were savages who showed no mercy. But what choice did they have now? Their own army had abandoned them in the rush to retreat. Heavy boots crunched on gravel outside. The women held their breath as the door creaked open. Sunlight streamed in, blinding them for a moment. "Clear," called an American voice. White soldiers swept through quickly, rifles ready. They barely glanced at the women before moving on to secure the road ahead. An hour passed. The women remained frozen, too afraid to speak above whispers. "Maybe they forgot us," young Nurse Yuki said hopefully. Aiko shook her head. "They never forget." More voices approached, speaking English, but these voices sounded different. The door swung open again, and the women gasped in unison. The soldiers entering were black, tall men with dark skin in American uniforms. The Japanese women stared in shock. Their propaganda had mentioned black American troops, but claimed they were even more savage than white Americans. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. His face was kind but tired. The name stitched on his uniform read, CPL Carter. He held a canteen in his outstretched hand. "Water," he said slowly in heavily accented Japanese. "Safe." The women pressed closer together. None moved toward him. The man's eyes softened with understanding. He set the canteen on the floor and stepped back, giving them space. "My name is Isaiah Carter," he said in English, pointing to himself. "I'm a medic." The women stared, too stunned to respond. The afternoon sun slanted through broken windows, casting long shadows across the hospital floor. Isaiah Carter returned with 2 other medics carrying supplies, clean bandages, medicine, and food rations. "Ma'am," Isaiah said to Aiko, recognizing she was in charge. "You're hurt." He pointed to her infected arm. Aiko pulled back. "I do not need enemy hands," she said in broken English, her chin raised with what dignity she had left. Isaiah nodded slowly. "I understand." He set a medical kit on the floor. "For you, then, to use yourself." His gentleness confused her. The other Japanese nurses watched cautiously from the corner. A shorter black soldier, Private Lewis according to his uniform, handed out ration biscuits. His face was tight with reluctance, but he followed Isaiah's orders without complaint. "Take small bites," Isaiah instructed. Your stomachs need time. The women accepted the food with trembling hands. They hadn't eaten properly in days. As the sun began to set, Isaiah and his men set up a perimeter outside. Before leaving, he turned to Aiko. I'll come back tomorrow morning. That arm needs medicine. When he was gone, the women gathered close. They are nothing like we were told, whispered Nurse Yuki. Don't be fooled, said Nurse Hana, the oldest among them. This could be a trick. Aiko said nothing. Her arm throbbed with pain as night insects began to hum in the humid darkness. She wondered if she had been wrong to refuse help. Aiko woke before dawn, her arm burning with fever. The other women still slept, exhausted from weeks of fear and hardship. Outside, she could hear the American soldiers changing guard. Their voices were low, respectful of the early hour. She tried to clean her wound using the supplies Isaiah had left, but her hands shook with weakness. The room spun around her, and she collapsed to her knees with a small cry. The door opened. Isaiah rushed in, followed by an elderly Filipino man in a scout's uniform. She needs help, Isaiah said to the Filipino. Tell her I'm here to help, not harm. The old man spoke in Japanese. The American medic says your wound is infected. It must be cleaned and bandaged properly, or you might lose your arm. Aiko looked up at Isaiah, seeing his concern. Everything she had been taught about Americans battled against what she was seeing with her own eyes. Why would you help me? She asked through the translator. I am your enemy. Isaiah's expression remained gentle. In this uniform, I'm a medic first, enemy second. Finally understanding, Aiko nodded and extended her arm. Isaiah worked carefully, cleaning the infected area with steady hands. Aiko winced, but noticed his touch was gentle. He spoke softly to her as he worked, even though she couldn't understand his words. The translator stood back, letting them communicate in this simple human language of care. As Isaiah finished wrapping a clean bandage around her arm, a shadow fell across the doorway. A white officer on horseback had arrived. Captain Raleigh, tall and thin-faced, looked down at the scene with cold eyes. Isaiah straightened up, his face suddenly guarded. The fragile trust in the room shattered like glass. Corporal Carter? Captain Raleigh's voice cut through the quiet. What exactly do you think you're doing? Isaiah stood at attention. Medical attention for the prisoners, sir. The captain dismounted and strode into the hospital, his boots loud on the wooden floor. I don't recall authorizing unnecessary contact with enemy personnel. The woman's arm was infected, sir. Standard protocol. I determine protocol here, Corporal. Raleigh's voice was razor-sharp. The Japanese nurses watched in confusion. In their experience, American officers were supposed to be cruel to them, not to their own men. These women are to be isolated until proper authorities arrive, Raleigh continued. Your unit is restricted to exterior duties only. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Isaiah replied, his voice tight. Dismissed, Corporal. Isaiah gathered his medical supplies. Before leaving, he glanced at Aiko, a silent apology in his eyes. As he walked out, Aiko watched him go. For the first time, she realized something unexpected. The men her country had taught her to fear as savages were being treated as lesser by their own army. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky. Rain was coming. By evening, the storm had arrived. Rain pounded the damaged roof, pouring through holes in the ceiling. The Japanese nurses huddled together in a corner, trying to stay dry. Outside, Isaiah and his men worked to cover the worst leaks, hammering salvaged metal sheets over gaping holes. Water pooled on the hospital floor. Aiko tried to move an elderly nurse to a drier spot, but the woman was too weak to walk. The door opened. Isaiah stood there, rain dripping from his uniform. This room's flooding, he said, gesturing to the water. "We need to move you all." Despite Captain Raleigh's orders, Isaiah and 2 soldiers entered. They helped carry the weakest women to a dry room on the other side of the building. Aiko tried to support another nurse, but her injured arm gave way. Isaiah moved quickly to her side, instinctively catching her before she fell. Their eyes met for a brief moment, fear replaced by something else. Hesitant trust. A blinding flash of lightning illuminated the doorway. Captain Raleigh stood there, his face dark with anger as he watched Isaiah supporting Aiko. "Corporal," his voice was cold as ice. "Outside, now." Isaiah gently passed Aiko to another soldier and followed the captain into the rain. The Japanese nurses exchanged worried glances. They had seen that kind of anger before in their own officers. It never ended well for those who received it. Before dawn the next day, Isaiah sat in the makeshift barracks tent beside the hospital. Rain still pattered softly on the canvas above. His unit spoke in hushed tones about rumors of transfer orders. "Captain's filed a report," whispered Private Lewis. "Says we're getting too friendly with the enemy." Isaiah stared at his hands, the same hands that had tended Aiko's wound. "They needed help. That's our job." "Not according to Raleigh." Lewis shook his head. "Orders are clear now. We don't set foot in that hospital except for supply drops. No contact with the prisoners." Isaiah's conscience twisted inside him. Aiko's infection had improved with treatment, but without follow-up care, it could worsen again. He'd seen men lose limbs to less. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the Japanese nurses whispered among themselves. "The black soldier, the medic, he is not what we expected," Yuki said. "None of them are," agreed another nurse. "Remember what the training films showed us? Monsters, they called them." Aiko said nothing. The fever had returned during the night, burning through her like fire. She tried to hide her pain, but as first light touched the eastern sky, her strength gave out. She collapsed to the floor with a cry that woke the others. Nurse Yuki ran to the window, desperate. Through the rain, she could see the barracks tent where the American soldiers stayed. Without hesitation, she called out, "Medic-san, please!" Inside the tent, Isaiah heard the call. He stood, knowing what answering would mean. Private Lewis grabbed his arm. "Captain's orders, Isaiah. You can't go in there." Isaiah looked at his friend. "Some orders you just can't follow." He stepped out into the rain, heading for the hospital and whatever consequences would come. The early morning light filtered weakly through rain clouds as Isaiah entered the hospital. 2 medics from his unit followed, despite the risk to their own careers. Inside, they found Aiko on the floor, her face flushed with fever. The other nurses backed away, uncertain. "Her wound's infected again," Isaiah said, kneeling beside her. He opened his medical kit and worked quickly to remove the old bandage. The infection had spread. Red streaks reached from the wound toward her shoulder, blood poisoning beginning to set in. "I need to clean this properly," Isaiah said. He looked at Aiko, trying to explain with simple English and gestures. "This will hurt, but it will save your arm. Understand?" Aiko nodded weakly. "I understand." Isaiah cleaned the wound thoroughly, then applied sulfa powder, a precious resource in the field, before rebandaging her arm. Some of the Japanese nurses cried quietly, overcome by the kindness so contrary to what they'd been taught to expect. One elderly nurse bowed deeply to Isaiah, tears streaming down her face. "She says you are honorable," Yuki translated in broken English. "Not like stories we hear?" Isaiah smiled sadly. "Those stories, they tell them about us too." He pointed to himself. "Black skin, they say makes me different. Less." The women looked at each other, recognition in their eyes. They too knew what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than character. Heavy footsteps approached outside. Captain Raleigh was coming. "You must go," Aiko whispered urgently. But it was too late. Raleigh's silhouette darkened the doorway, his face thunderous. "What the hell is going on here?" Raleigh's voice boomed through the small room. Isaiah stood, facing his superior. "Medical emergency, sir. The prisoner's infection was worsening." "I gave you a direct order, Corporal." Raleigh's face reddened. "No contact with the prisoners." "Sir, with respect, she could have lost her arm." "She's the enemy!" Raleigh shouted. "Or have you forgotten that while playing nursemaid?" The Japanese women watched the confrontation, understanding the tone if not every word. Nurse Yuki stepped forward, trying to explain in her limited English. "Please, he help only—" "Silence!" Raleigh barked, causing her to stumble back in fear. "These people bombed Pearl Harbor. They're not worth American medicine." His contempt was clear, not just for the Japanese prisoners, but for the black soldiers under his command. "Corporal Carter, you're removed from medical duties pending formal reprimand. Report to Lieutenant Green for reassignment to labor detail." 2 white soldiers appeared at the door. "Escort him out," Raleigh ordered. As Isaiah was marched outside, Aiko watched helplessly from the floor. The bandage on her arm was clean and white against her skin, evidence of Isaiah's care. "He saved me," she whispered in Japanese. "Why punish him?" Night fell slowly over the camp, the rain finally stopping to leave a heavy silence behind. The story continued beyond the hospital walls. In the labor camp where Isaiah had been reassigned, he thought about Aiko and the other nurses, about the lies they'd all been told about each other, about how easy it was to hate someone you'd never met. Meanwhile, Aiko's arm began to heal thanks to Isaiah's treatment. As her fever broke, her mind cleared, allowing her to think more deeply about what she had witnessed. All her life, she had been taught that Americans, especially Black Americans, were savage enemies. But the hands that had treated her wounds had been gentle. The eyes that had looked at her had seen her humanity, not just her uniform. The world she thought she knew was changing, one small act of kindness at a time. And in that small field hospital in the Philippines, as World War II drew to its bloody close, 2 people from opposite sides began to see past the barriers of language, race, and war, to the shared humanity that no propaganda could erase. Night settled over the hospital camp. Inside, Aiko sat up for the first time in days, her fever finally broken. The other Japanese nurses gathered around her on thin mats spread across the floor. "How is your arm?" asked Nurse Yuki, her young face lined with worry. Aiko moved her bandaged arm carefully. "Better. The medicine he gave me. It worked." The Filipino scout who sometimes translated for them sat quietly in the corner, pretending not to listen. Guards paced outside, their shadows passing across the single window. "I don't understand," said Aiko softly. "Why would he risk punishment to help me?" Hana, the oldest nurse, shook her head. "Our training said Americans were monsters, that black soldiers were the worst of all." "They lied to us," whispered another nurse named May. "About everything." The women fell silent, each lost in thought. The world they'd been raised in, the beliefs they'd never questioned, all of it was crumbling like the bombed buildings around them. Yuki hesitated, then pulled something from inside her torn uniform. "I've been keeping a diary," she said, offering the small notebook to Aiko. "Since the day they found us. Read what I wrote." Aiko took the diary with her good hand. By the dim light of a single lantern, she read Yuki's careful characters. "Today I saw kindness from an enemy. The Black American medic treats us as people, not prizes of war. His hands are gentle when they could be cruel. His eyes see our pain when he could choose blindness. Everything we were taught was wrong. Tears welled in Aiko's eyes as she continued reading. Outside, guards changed shifts, their lanterns casting long shadows through the window. Aiko clutched the diary as she finally drifted to sleep, her mind full of questions she'd never thought to ask before. Morning light filtered through the broken windows. Aiko was still reading Yuki's diary when the door banged open. Captain Raleigh strode in, his boots muddy from the previous day's rain. He surveyed the room with cold eyes. "Inspection," he announced, though no one but the Filipino scout understood his words. The Japanese women bowed their heads respectfully, having learned this was safest. Aiko tried to hide the diary, but she moved too slowly. Raleigh's sharp eyes caught the movement. "What's that you're hiding?" He snatched the notebook from her hands. Aiko's heart pounded as he flipped through the pages. Though he couldn't read Japanese, the repeated mention of Carter-san in English letters was clear enough. His face darkened as he found a page where Yuki had practiced writing in English. There, in careful script, were the words, "Black soldiers kind, not like what we told." Raleigh's knuckles whitened as he gripped the diary. "So that's how it is," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. The women sat frozen, not understanding his words but reading his anger clearly. "Fraternization with the enemy," he muttered. "Carter's done now." He stormed out, taking the diary with him. "What happened?" asked Yuki in Japanese. "What did he see?" Aiko's face had gone pale. "Your words about the black soldiers. I think he will use them to hurt Corporal Carter." The guilt hit her like a wave. The man who had saved her arm, perhaps her life, was now in danger because of her. Under the shade of a canvas tent, Isaiah stood at attention before 3 white officers. His hands were tied in front of him. Captain Raleigh paced back and forth, Yuki's diary on the table beside him. "Corporal Carter," said the senior officer, a major whose name Isaiah didn't know, "you've been brought up on charges of disobeying direct orders and fraternizing with enemy personnel." Isaiah kept his eyes forward. "I was providing medical care, sir." Raleigh stepped forward. "It went beyond medical care. This diary was found in the women's quarters." He tapped the notebook. "I've had the Filipino scout translate parts. It contains inappropriate admiration for American soldiers. Your name appears repeatedly." "I can't control what they write, sir," Isaiah said calmly. "But you can control your actions," Raleigh snapped. "Giving extra rations, multiple medical visits, speaking kindly to the enemy. They're nurses, sir, medical personnel like me." "They're Japanese!" Raleigh's face reddened. "The same people who bombed Pearl Harbor. The same people killing American boys across the Pacific." The major held up his hand. "That's enough, Captain." He turned to Isaiah. "Corporal, did you disobey Captain Raleigh's order to avoid contact with the prisoners?" Isaiah straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. One prisoner had a severe infection. Without treatment, she could have lost her arm or her life. As a medic, I couldn't let that happen." The major studied him for a long moment. "Pending further investigation, you'll be held under guard. Dismissed." Outside the tent, the Japanese nurses watched from the hospital doorway as Isaiah was escorted away, his wrists bound. Aiko's fingers tightened around the bandage on her arm, the same arm he had saved. Her heart felt heavy with responsibility and determination. Late afternoon sun beat down on the camp. In the hospital, Aiko gathered her strength and approached the Filipino scout who sometimes served as translator. "Please," she said in her limited English, "help me. Tell American truth." The old man looked at her sadly. "What truth, miss?" Black soldier, Carter-san. He do nothing wrong. He saved my arm. She pointed to her healing wound. Captain take diary. Use against him. The scout sighed. I understand. But POW testimony isn't worth much, and Captain Raleigh outranks any black soldier who might help. Must try, Aiko insisted. Please, paper and pen? The scout hesitated, then slipped her a pencil stub and a scrap of paper. Be careful, he warned. For the next hour, Aiko labored over a letter in her careful English. To American Commander, Black Medic Carter saved my arm, saved my life. He show respect, nothing more. He is good soldier. Good man. Please no punishment for mercy. With respect, Nurse Aiko Tanaka. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her uniform. Outside, the sound of trucks being loaded echoed across the camp. Soldiers called to each other. Something was happening. A transfer, perhaps. I will give this tomorrow, Aiko whispered to herself. At first light, before they take him away. As darkness fell, she practiced the English words she would need, determined to make someone listen. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the trees. Aiko slipped out a back window of the hospital, her heart pounding. She clutched her letter tightly. The camp was stirring, but most soldiers were still in their tents. She needed to find the command tent, the place where decisions were made. She crept along the edge of the jungle, staying in shadows. Her arm ached, but determination pushed her forward. A twig snapped behind her. Aiko froze. Isha nani wo shaite iru? A harsh voice whispered in Japanese. What are you doing? She turned slowly. 3 Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle, their uniforms torn and dirty. They were holdouts, men who refused to surrender despite Japan's failing war effort. You wear the medical symbol, one said, noticing her nurse's armband. You're one of ours. Aiko nodded carefully. Yes, I am a nurse. The leader's eyes narrowed. Then why do you sneak around the American camp? Why are you not their prisoner? I am their prisoner, she explained quickly. I'm trying to reach their commander. The soldiers exchanged dark looks. To tell him what? Japanese military secrets? No, to help a man who showed kindness. The leader spat on the ground. An American? You betray your country for an enemy? Fear crawled up Aiko's spine. These men were desperate, dangerous. Surrender is treason, the leader continued, his voice cold. Helping Americans is worse. Another soldier raised his rifle. The Emperor would be ashamed. We cannot allow this dishonor. Aiko backed away slowly. Please, you don't understand. We understand enough. The leader cut her off. He nodded to the others. Take her into the jungle. No noise. As they grabbed her arms, distant voices called her name from the direction of the camp. Nurse Aiko, where are you? Black soldiers, Isaiah's friends. They had noticed her missing and come looking. In a small jungle clearing, Aiko stood between 2 worlds, Japanese holdouts behind her, American soldiers approaching through the trees. Let her go, called Private Lewis, emerging into the clearing with 2 other black soldiers. They had defied orders to search for her when the morning count came up short. The Japanese soldiers raised their rifles. One pushed Aiko roughly to the ground. American dogs, the leader spat in Japanese. Come to die. Private Lewis held up his hands. We just want the nurse. No one needs to get hurt. The leader didn't understand his words, but the meaning was clear enough. He fired a warning shot into the air. What happened next unfolded in seconds. The Americans dove for cover. The Japanese soldiers scattered into defensive positions. Aiko crawled behind a fallen tree as gunfire erupted around her. The firefight was brief but intense. When it ended, the Japanese holdouts had melted back into the jungle, leaving 1 wounded man behind. The Americans had stood their ground. Aiko remained frozen behind the log, shaking with fear and exhaustion. Private Lewis approached slowly, his rifle lowered. "Nurse Aiko, you okay?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why you help me?" Lewis offered his hand. "Isaiah would have done the same. We look out for each other." As he helped her to her feet, the reality of their situation sank in. They had left their post without authorization. They had engaged enemy soldiers. They had rescued a prisoner of war who should never have been outside the camp. The consequences would be severe. "We need to get back," another soldier said anxiously. "Captain Raleigh will have our heads." "Too late to worry about that now," Lewis replied. They supported Aiko between them as they made their way back toward camp. The eastern sky was turning orange as dawn broke over the treetops. Whatever waited for them, there was no turning back now. Morning light flooded the camp as Aiko and the soldiers approached the perimeter. Captain Raleigh stood waiting, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded as they approached. "Abandoning your posts? Taking a prisoner outside authorized areas?" Private Lewis stepped forward. "Sir, she was missing during morning count. We went to find her." "Without authorization," Raleigh shouted. "And now I find you bringing her back like some kind of rescue party?" More officers had gathered, drawn by the commotion. The Filipino scout watched from a distance, his face troubled. "Captain, we heard gunfire," another officer said. "Japanese holdouts in the jungle," Lewis explained. "They captured her. We intervened." Raleigh's eyes narrowed. "So now you're engaging the enemy without orders? That's court-martial territory for every last one of you." He turned to Aiko. "And you, trying to escape, were you?" Aiko stepped forward on trembling legs. The letter was still clutched in her hand. "No escape. Try to help Carter-san. He innocent." "Silence!" Raleigh snapped. "I won't hear testimony from the enemy." "But sir," Aiko persisted, her voice stronger, "I have letter. Truth about—" "I said silence," Raleigh signaled to two guards. "Get her back to the hospital, confined, no contact with anyone." As the guards moved toward her, Aiko thrust the letter toward the other officers. "Please, read." Raleigh snatched it from her hand and tore it in half without looking at it. "Escort her away." "Now." Aiko's eyes filled with tears as the guards led her back to the hospital. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, seeing Private Lewis and the others being placed under guard as well. She still had her original letter hidden in her uniform. As long as she had that, she had hope. Evening shadows lengthened across the camp. In the hospital ward, Aiko sat with the other nurses, explaining everything that had happened. "They saved me from our own soldiers," she told them in Japanese. "Now they face punishment for it." The Filipino scout had slipped into the ward under the pretense of checking supplies. He listened as Aiko spoke. "Tomorrow," he said quietly in Japanese, "a senior commander arrives, Captain Raleigh's superior. If you want to help your friends, that's your chance." Aiko nodded. "I need to rewrite my letter, and I need you to deliver it." "Dangerous," the scout warned, "for both of us." "Please," Aiko begged. "These men saved my life twice now. First my arm, then from the holdouts." The old man studied her face. "You care for this black soldier? This Carter?" Aiko lowered her eyes. "He showed me kindness when he had every reason not to." The scout sighed. "Very well. Write your letter. I will try to deliver it." Using another pencil stub and paper the scout provided, Aiko carefully rewrote her testimony, adding details about Isaiah's proper conduct and how the diary had been misinterpreted. The other nurses gathered around her. "We will sign too," Nurse Yuki said, "all of us, to show it's true." One by one, they added their names to the letter. When it was finished, the scout folded it carefully into his pocket. "The commander arrives at sunrise," he told them. "I will find a way." As lanterns dimmed across the camp, Aiko lay awake, her mind too full for sleep. Tomorrow would decide everything, for Isaiah, for the soldiers who had rescued her, and perhaps for herself as well. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm night. Stars peeked through broken ceiling planks. Somewhere in the camp, Isaiah too might be looking at those same stars, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Aiko closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not to any god of war, but to whatever power might listen to a plea for simple human kindness. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Aiko and the nurses prepared themselves as best they could, washing their faces in a basin of cool water, straightening their tattered uniforms. "We must look dignified," Aiko told them, "if we are to be believed." Word spread through the camp. The senior commander had arrived. Important decisions would be made today. The Filipino scout appeared briefly at the door. "It is done," he whispered to Aiko. "The letter is delivered." Hope and fear battled in Aiko's heart. Had she done enough? Would anyone listen to enemy nurses over an American officer? All they could do now was wait, and hope that truth would finally be heard. The morning sun beat down on the camp as Aiko and the other nurses were escorted to the headquarters tent. Their guards walked stiffly beside them, eyes straight ahead. Aiko's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Her palms were slick with sweat. Everything, Isaiah's future, her own honor, perhaps even the truth itself, hung on what would happen in the next few minutes. The headquarters tent was larger than the others, with an American flag hanging limply in the still air. Inside, several officers sat behind a folding table. At the center was an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, the senior Allied commander who had just arrived. Captain Raleigh stood to one side, his face tight with controlled anger. And there was Isaiah, still under guard, his wrists no longer bound, but his expression carefully blank. The commander looked up as the nurses entered. "These are the Japanese medical personnel." "Yes, sir," Captain Raleigh answered stiffly. "Though I question the wisdom of—" "I've read the letter, Captain," the commander cut him off, "and I've decided to hear them out." Raleigh's mouth snapped shut, a muscle working in his jaw. The commander nodded to the Filipino scout. "You'll translate. Tell the head nurse to step forward." The scout spoke softly in Japanese. Aiko took a deep breath and moved to the center of the tent, bowing slightly from habit. "Your name?" the commander asked. "Aiko Tanaka," she replied in careful English. "Head nurse, Imperial Army Medical Corps." The commander nodded. "Nurse Tanaka, I've read your letter. Now I want to hear directly from you what happened with Corporal Carter and your treatment." Aiko glanced at Isaiah, who kept his eyes forward, showing no emotion. "My arm," she began, touching the healing wound. "Very bad. Infection. Carter-san, clean it, give medicine. Save arm, maybe save life." Her simple English came slowly but clearly. He show respect, always proper, never inappropriate. The commander listened intently. "And the diary Captain Raleigh found? Nurse Yuki write about kindness, about surprise. We taught Americans cruel, black soldiers worst. But we see truth with own eyes." She gestured to her fellow nurses. "All see same." One by one, the other nurses stepped forward to confirm Aiko's words. Though their English was limited, their meaning was clear. Isaiah had been professional, respectful, and had provided medical care that saved Aiko from losing her arm. Captain Raleigh grew increasingly agitated. "Sir, with all due respect, these are enemy personnel. Their testimony can't be trusted." The commander turned to him slowly. And why is that, Captain? Because they're Japanese? Or because their statements contradict your accusations? Raleigh flushed dark red. Sir, I've heard enough for now, the commander said firmly. Captain Raleigh, you'll remain for further questioning. Corporal Carter, you're temporarily released from custody pending my final decision. The nurses will return to their quarters. As they were escorted out, Aiko dared to look at Isaiah. For just a moment, their eyes met. His held a mixture of gratitude and something more complex, a recognition of what her testimony might cost her. The commander's voice followed them outside. Now, Captain Raleigh, let's discuss your conduct in this matter. The midday sun hung overhead, baking the dusty ground. Outside the headquarters tent, Isaiah stood alone, still processing what had happened. For the first time in days, no guards flanked him. The crushing weight of court-martial no longer hung over his head. Because of her. Because she had risked everything to speak the truth. Across the compound, Aiko and the other nurses sat in the shade of the hospital porch. They had been allowed outside under the watchful eyes of a single guard who kept a respectful distance. The Filipino scout approached Isaiah. The commander is still questioning Captain Raleigh, he said quietly. I overheard some of it. It's not going well for the captain. Isaiah nodded but said nothing. His eyes were on Aiko. The old scout followed his gaze. You want to thank her? Yes. The scout considered this, then shrugged. I will translate. Just keep it brief and proper, eh? No need to give anyone new reasons to talk. Together they crossed to where the nurses sat. The guard straightened but didn't interfere as Isaiah approached. Aiko looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. Something flickered across her face. Relief, perhaps. Isaiah removed his cap, a gesture of respect. Thank you, he said simply, for telling the truth. The scout translated softly. Aiko stood and bowed slightly. Truth is duty, she replied through the scout. You saved my arm, I save your honor. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither could safely say. Your infection, Isaiah finally asked. How is it now? Aiko extended her arm, showing the healing wound. Much better? Good medicine? Good doctor? Isaiah smiled slightly. Not a doctor, just a medic. Same thing to me, she answered through the scout. Her eyes held his steadily. In that quiet moment on a dusty afternoon, two people from worlds at war found a fragile connection. Not romance. They both understood that was impossible, but something perhaps more precious. Recognition of shared humanity. Isaiah spoke again, his voice low. I'm sorry about your diary, and for the danger you faced in the jungle. Aiko shook her head. I'm sorry your captain tried to hurt you for showing kindness. The scout translated faithfully, glancing between them with wise, knowing eyes. Your propaganda told you we were monsters, Isaiah said, and yours said the same about us, Aiko replied. They were wrong, they both said almost simultaneously. Then, despite everything, they shared a small smile of understanding. The moment broke as a jeep roared into camp. More officers were arriving. The world of war and rules was closing in again. I should go, Isaiah said, replacing his cap. Thank you again, Nurse Tanaka. As he turned to leave, Aiko called after him in careful English. Carter-san? He paused. In another life, she said without the scout's help. We might be friends. Isaiah nodded once, understanding perfectly. In another life. Late afternoon sun slanted through the command tent. Inside, the air was thick with tension as the investigation continued. Captain Raleigh stood rigid, sweat beading on his forehead despite the electric fan whirring in the corner. Facing him were the commander and two other officers, A clerk typed quietly, recording everything. "Let me be perfectly clear, Captain," the commander said, his voice level but hard. "I've reviewed the medical logs, prisoner treatment reports, and testimony from multiple sources. The picture they paint is not flattering to you." "Sir, I was following protocol for enemy POW handling," Raleigh insisted. The commander picked up a folder. "According to this report, which you filed, Corporal Carter was guilty of excessive medical attention to enemy personnel and inappropriate fraternization. Yet our medical corps guidelines clearly state that enemy medical personnel are to be treated according to Geneva Convention standards, including appropriate medical care." "Sir, I believed—" "Furthermore," the commander continued, cutting him off, "you specifically ordered that an infected wound should receive minimal treatment, contradicting standard medical protocol." He set the folder down and leaned forward. "The question becomes, Captain, why would you issue such an order? And why would you pursue such serious charges against a medic for doing his job?" Raleigh's jaw tightened. "Sir, I deemed the contact excessive." "Based on what evidence?" "The diary, sir. It contained—" "Yes, the diary, which, according to our translator, contained nothing inappropriate whatsoever, just expressions of surprise that American soldiers, particularly black soldiers, treated them humanely." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Almost as if the writer expected otherwise, as if they'd been told to expect cruelty. Sound familiar, Captain?" Raleigh remained silent. "What troubles me most," the commander continued, "is the pattern here. Your orders specifically restricted black personnel from certain duties. Your reports consistently rate black units lower than white ones with similar performance. And when a black medic performs his duties admirably, you pursue charges that could end his career." Outside the tent, Isaiah walked past slowly, hearing fragments of the conversation. He didn't stop, that would be asking for trouble, but he caught enough to understand what was happening. Inside, the commander had reached his decision. "Captain Raleigh, pending further review, you're relieved of command effective immediately. Lieutenant Simmons will assume your duties." "Sir, this is outrageous, based on the word of the enemy and your own reports, Captain, your own contradictory orders, your own pattern of conduct." The commander stood. "This isn't a battlefield decision. It's a matter of leadership and judgment. Yours has been found lacking." As Raleigh was escorted out, Isaiah continued his walk, his face carefully expressionless. But inside, a small measure of justice had been served. That evening, word spread quickly through the camp. Isaiah's charges had been dropped completely. Captain Raleigh was being transferred out, and the Japanese nurses were to be treated with the respect due to medical personnel under the Geneva Convention. Isaiah stepped out of his tent into the pale evening light. For the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe freely again. But the relief was bittersweet. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new challenges. The war wasn't over, and he was still a black man in an army that often didn't value him. But today, at least, truth had prevailed. Sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Isaiah walked along the edge of the camp. He'd been fully restored to his medic duties and had spent the afternoon treating minor injuries among the troops. Now, with his shift finished, he found himself drawn toward the hospital where Aiko and the other nurses were housed. He didn't plan to enter. That would still invite unnecessary attention. But somehow he needed to be near, to know they were being treated well. As he approached, he saw her sitting alone on the small porch steps, watching the same sunset. Her slender figure was outlined against the colorful sky. The guard stood at a respectful distance, smoking a cigarette. Aiko looked up as Isaiah's footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Their eyes met across the distance, and she nodded slightly in greeting. Isaiah hesitated, then walked closer, stopping a proper distance away. "Good evening," he said softly. "Good evening," she replied, her English careful but clearer than before. They didn't need the scout to translate such simple greetings. For a moment, they simply shared the sunset in silence. "I hear news," Aiko finally said, stringing her words together with visible effort. "Tomorrow we go. New place, rehabilitation center." Isaiah nodded. He'd heard the same. "It's a better place, for recovery, before you return home." Home. The word hung between them. Her home was Japan. His was America. Two nations still locked in a war that had consumed the world. "Japan. Very far now," she said softly. Isaiah understood she wasn't just talking about distance. "America, too." The guard glanced their way, but seemed unconcerned by their quiet conversation. "Nurse Tanaka?" Isaiah began, then stopped. "Aiko," he corrected himself, using her name for the first time. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "Were you afraid of me when we first met?" Aiko considered his question carefully. "Yes," she admitted. "Very afraid. In Japan, they say, Black Americans most dangerous, most savage." She looked down. "I am sorry." "Don't be," Isaiah said gently. "In America, they say Japanese have no hearts. Feel no pain like real people." He shook his head. "Lies make hate easier." "Lies," she agreed. "Many lies." A truck rumbled up the road, breaking the moment. It was coming to prepare for tomorrow's transport. Soon, Aiko and the other nurses would be gone. "I wish," Isaiah began, then fell silent. What could he wish for? They lived in a world where wishing couldn't change the hard realities of race, war, and duty. "I know," Aiko said simply. She did know. He could see it in her eyes. She extended her hand slightly, the hand on her healed arm. Isaiah looked at it for a long moment. Then, with great care, he reached out. Their fingers didn't quite touch. They both knew they couldn't. But they came close enough to feel the warmth between them. "In another life," he whispered. "In another life," she echoed. The truck pulled closer. The moment was ending. They both felt it. "Thank you, Isaiah Carter," Aiko said formally, "for saving my arm, for seeing me as human." "Thank you, Aiko Tanaka," he replied, "for seeing me the same way." The truck stopped. Men jumped out, calling orders. Isaiah stepped back, resuming the proper distance between POW and soldier. But something had changed between them that could never be unchanged. In a world determined to make them enemies, they had found a moment of understanding, of connection, of peace. And in the midst of a terrible war, that small victory felt more important than any battle could ever be. The night wrapped around the camp like a blanket. Stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. In the women's quarters, Aiko helped the other nurses prepare for tomorrow's journey. They packed their few belongings, worn uniforms, a comb shared between them, a single photograph of home. Across the camp, Isaiah checked his medical supplies, taking inventory by lamplight. Tomorrow he would help load the women onto trucks for their journey to the rehabilitation center. His official duty would be to ensure they were healthy enough for transport. His unofficial mission would be to make sure they were treated with dignity until the last moment. Both of them moved through their separate tasks with practiced efficiency. Both pretended this was just another day, just another duty. But inside, they carried the memory of that sunset conversation, of almost touching hands, of the brief, precious connection between two souls that war had tried and failed to make enemies. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. The war would continue its grinding pace toward an inevitable conclusion. Their lives would move in separate directions, pulled by forces beyond their control. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, they had this: the knowledge that humanity could survive even here, in the shadow of hatred. That kindness could grow in the most unlikely soil. That truth, once spoken, could never truly be silenced again. And perhaps, in its own way, that was enough. Morning came too quickly. The rising sun painted the camp in soft golden light as soldiers loaded supplies onto the waiting trucks. Today, Aiko and the other Japanese nurses would leave for the rehabilitation center, a place where they would stay until arrangements could be made for their return to Japan. Isaiah stood with his unit, medical kit in hand. His official orders were to check each woman's health before transport. Privately, he wanted to make sure they were treated well on this final day. The nurses emerged from the hospital building in a neat line, carrying their few possessions. Aiko led them, her back straight, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Though her uniform was worn and patched, she wore it like the finest dress. Isaiah stepped forward as they approached the trucks. "Medical check before boarding," he explained to the guard. He moved down the line efficiently, checking each woman's vital signs, asking simple questions about pain or discomfort. Most answered with shy smiles or nods, their fear of American soldiers long gone. When he reached Aiko, their eyes met briefly. So much had happened since that first day when she had refused his help. "How is your arm?" he asked professionally, taking her wrist to check her pulse. "Healing well," she replied. "Good medicine, good doctor." Isaiah smiled slightly at their private joke. "Not a doctor, just a medic." "Same thing to me," she said softly. He completed his check and stepped back. "You're cleared for transport, ma'am." One by one, the women climbed into the truck. Aiko was the last to board. She paused at the tailgate, looking back at Isaiah. The morning sunlight caught her face, illuminating it for a brief, precious moment. No words passed between them. None were needed. In her eyes, he saw gratitude, respect, and a wistful acknowledgement of what might have been in a different world. Isaiah nodded once, a gesture filled with all the things he couldn't say aloud. Aiko nodded in return, then turned and climbed into the truck. The driver called out orders. Engines rumbled to life. The trucks began to move, wheels crunching on the gravel road. Dust rose in clouds behind them. Isaiah and his unit stood at attention as the convoy departed. Through the swirling dust, he caught one last glimpse of Aiko's face at the back of the truck, watching the camp, and him, fade into the distance. Then the trucks turned a corner, and she was gone. The dust settled slowly on the empty road. Isaiah's shoulders felt heavy as he turned back toward his duties. The world seemed strangely quiet, as if something important had left with those trucks. Private Lewis stepped up beside him. "You okay?" Isaiah nodded, his face carefully neutral. "Just another day." But they both knew it wasn't. Something had changed these past weeks, something neither the army nor the war could touch. Isaiah returned to his tent, shoulders squared, steps even. But inside, he carried the memory of a sunset conversation in almost touching hands, of courage that had saved his career, of eyes that had seen him as fully human when much of his own country still did not. Small things, perhaps, in a world at war. But to Isaiah, they felt like seeds of something important, something that might, someday, grow into a better world. 2 weeks passed. Isaiah had been transferred to a larger U.S. Army transit camp near Manila. The fighting continued across the Pacific Islands, but rumors spread among the troops. Japan was weakening. The war might end soon. Isaiah worked long hours in the medical tent, treating everything from bullet wounds to jungle rot. The work kept his hands busy and his mind focused. But in quiet moments, his thoughts often drifted to Aiko and the other nurses. He wondered if they had reached the rehabilitation center safely, if they were being treated well, if Aiko's arm had fully healed. He would never know. Such was the nature of war. People entered your life briefly, then vanished, carried away by the currents of conflict. On a humid afternoon, mail call brought a welcome distraction. Isaiah received a letter from his mother in Georgia and a package of cookies that had somehow survived the long journey mostly intact. He sat on his cot that evening, reading his mother's careful handwriting by lamplight. She wrote of home, his sister's new baby, the victory garden behind their church, neighbors receiving telegrams about sons who wouldn't return. Normal life and war grief, woven together like the quilts his grandmother used to make. When he finished reading, Isaiah took out paper to write back. His pencil hovered over the blank page. What should he tell them? What could he tell them? Finally, he began to write. Dear Mama and family, I'm well and safe. The work is hard but important. I'm still helping people, which is all I ever wanted to do. Something happened here that I can't fully explain. I met someone who reminded me what people can be when they look past what they've been taught to see. I helped her, and later, she helped me. It made me think maybe the world can be better after all, if we're brave enough to see each other as human first. I miss you all. Tell Esther I can't wait to meet my new nephew. Tell Pastor Williams I'm still saying my prayers. With love, Isaiah. He folded the letter and addressed the envelope. In the morning, he would turn it over to the mail censors who would read every word, marking out anything they deemed inappropriate or revealing. Sure enough, when Isaiah checked a week later, his letter had been cleared for sending, with thick black lines obscuring his words about Iko. The military didn't want stories about fraternization with the enemy reaching home, even innocent ones. But it didn't matter. The censors could black out his words, but they couldn't erase what had happened. They couldn't change what he had learned. As April turned to May and May to June, news from the Pacific grew increasingly grim for Japan. Islands fell one by one to American forces, and then, in early August, came the news that would change everything. Atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered soon after. World War II was finally over. For Isaiah and millions of other soldiers, it meant one thing. They were going home. Savannah, Georgia greeted Isaiah with late summer heat and the familiar scent of river and pine. After years away, he was finally home. Back to the segregated South, where his uniform earned him nods from white folks on one street and warm welcomes in the black neighborhood where he'd grown up. September 1945 brought change and constancy in equal measure. The war had ended, but for Black Americans like Isaiah, many battles remained to be fought. The same colored-only signs still hung on water fountains and bathroom doors. The same sidelong glances followed him when he walked downtown. Yet something in Isaiah had changed. The war had taken him halfway around the world, shown him horrors and kindnesses he could never have imagined. He had seen the worst of humanity, and also, in unexpected moments, the best. He found work at the Colored Veterans Hospital, where his medical skills were valued, if not fairly compensated. Each day, he helped men who had fought for a country that still treated them as second-class citizens. He understood their bitterness. He shared it sometimes. But he also remembered Iko, and how they had both pushed past propaganda to see each other clearly. On a warm September afternoon, Isaiah sat on his mother's porch, watching neighborhood children play in the dusty street. His work shift had ended early, and he was enjoying the rare moment of quiet. The mailman, Mr. Robbins, who had delivered mail in this neighborhood since before Isaiah was born, turned the corner with his heavy bag. "Afternoon, Isaiah," he called. "Got something for you today? Been forwarded all over creation, looks like." He handed Isaiah a small, battered envelope. No return address. Just his name and a military address that had been crossed out and rewritten multiple times as it followed him from the Philippines to processing centers and finally home. Isaiah turned it over in his hands. Curious. The paper was thin and delicate, clearly foreign. His heart began to beat faster. "Thanks, Mr. Robbins," he said, his voice suddenly dry. When the mailman had moved on, Isaiah carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a pressed wildflower, small and purple, the kind that had grown around the field hospital in the Philippines, and a single sheet of paper with one line of careful English handwriting. "I was shocked when I saw you, not because of who you were, but because of who I had been." No signature. None was needed. Isaiah stared at the flower, a lump forming in his throat. Somehow, against all odds, Aiko had found a way to send him this final message, this small piece of their shared story. His sister came onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's that, Isaiah?" He gently closed his fingers around the flower. "Just a note. From someone I met during the war." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Mama says dinner's almost ready when you want to come in." Isaiah nodded, still lost in thought. "I'll be there soon." As his sister went back inside, he sat watching dusk settle over Savannah, holding the pressed flower and the memory of a brave Japanese nurse who had risked everything to speak truth. The porch swing creaked gently as Isaiah rocked back and forth, still holding Aiko's message. The evening air was warm and heavy with the scent of his mother's garden. He read the line again. "I was shocked when I saw you, not because of who you were, but because of who I had been." Simple words that contained so much. In them, Isaiah heard Aiko's voice, saw her face in the sunset light, remembered their almost touching hands. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything they could never express. How strange that someone he had known for such a short time, someone from the enemy side, could have left such a mark on his life. Before meeting Aiko, Isaiah had known intellectually that Japanese propaganda painted Americans, especially Black Americans, as monsters. But seeing that belief challenged in her eyes, watching her world shift as she recognized his humanity, it had changed something in him too. If she could question what she had been raised to believe, could not others do the same? Could not he himself? The war was over, but the quiet revolution inside Isaiah endured. It gave him strength on days when the weight of injustice felt too heavy to bear. It reminded him that change was possible, one human connection at a time. A breeze lifted the petals of the pressed flower in his palm. Isaiah smiled faintly, bittersweet, reflective, changed. He would never see Aiko again. Their lives would continue on separate paths, divided by oceans and cultures and the aftershocks of war. But what they had shared would remain. A moment of recognition, of seeing past barriers erected by hatred and fear. Isaiah carefully folded the flower back into its paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Then he stood and walked into his mother's house for dinner, carrying with him the quiet certainty that humanity, even when forbidden, could reshape a life forever. 10 years passed. The world changed in ways both great and small. Isaiah finished medical school on the GI Bill, becoming one of the first Black doctors at Savannah's main hospital. He married a kind-hearted schoolteacher named Ruby, and they had 2 children who grew up hearing stories about courage and kindness in unexpected places. On his office desk, Isaiah kept a small frame. Inside, pressed behind glass, was a purple flower from the Philippines, preserved against time. Beside it, in his careful handwriting, were words he had carried in his heart since that faraway field hospital. The truest victory in war is to remember your own humanity and recognize it in others. Sometimes patients asked about the unusual display. Isaiah would smile and say only that it was a reminder from an old friend. But on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and Ruby was grading papers, Isaiah would sometimes take out the frame and remember a brave Japanese nurse who had saved more than just his career. She had shown him that even in the darkest times, when the world seemed bent on dividing people, connection was still possible. That seeing each other clearly, beyond propaganda, beyond prejudice, beyond fear, was perhaps the most revolutionary act of all. And in a world that continued to struggle with those same divisions, that lesson remained his most precious souvenir of war. Not a battle won or an enemy defeated, but a moment of genuine human connection that had changed him forever. In another life, perhaps they might have been friends. In this one, they had been something just as rare and valuable, witnesses to each other's humanity in a time when the world had forgotten such things were possible. Isaiah never knew what happened to Aiko after she returned to Japan. Whether she too had built a life, had a family, kept her own memories of that time. But he liked to imagine her somewhere across the ocean, perhaps also remembering their brief connection with the same mixture of sadness and hope that he felt. And sometimes, when the world's problems seemed too big to solve, Isaiah would touch the framed flower and remember Aiko's words. He would think of how two people, taught to hate each other, had found something better instead. It wasn't everything. It couldn't change history or heal all wounds or bring perfect justice. But it was something real and true in a world that needed more of both. And sometimes, Isaiah had learned, that was enough to build a life on. Enough to keep working for a better world, one human connection at a time. The end.